Join Marple the Clue Crafter for Miss Marple's brilliant mystery solutions.
In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Hall, a scream pierces the night, and a loyal valet lies dead, a jewelled letter-opener in his heart. Who among the elegant guests, Sir Reginald, the stern patriarch, Lady Evelyn, hiding her fears, or Julian, the charming heir, holds the key to a deadly secret? As whispers of blackmail and betrayal unravel, only Hercule Poirot, with his brilliant little grey cells, can untangle a web of lies where every clue points to guilt and every motive hides a twist. Will the truth emerge before another falls? Dive into a classic mystery where no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Blackthorn Hall. The late September sun cast a golden haze over the rolling lawns of Blackthorn Hall, a sprawling Georgian estate nestled in the heart of the Dorset countryside. To Captain Arthur Hastings, the scene was one of quintessential English charm. Ivy-clad walls, mullioned windows glinting in the light, and the faint clatter of teacups from the terrace where the guests had gathered. Yet, beneath the polite murmur of conversation, there was an undercurrent of unease, a tension that Hastings, with his soldier's instinct, could not quite dismiss. It was a Friday afternoon, precisely 4:17 p.m. on the 22nd of September, 1925, as Hastings would later recall when recounting the affair to his friend Hercule Poirot. The invitation to Blackthorn Hall had come unexpectedly, extended by Sir Reginald Ashby, a retired industrialist known for his wealth and his temper. The occasion was ostensibly a celebration of Sir Reginald's 60th birthday, but Hastings suspected there was more to it. Sir Reginald was not a man given to sentimentality, and the eclectic mix of guests suggested a purpose beyond mere festivity. The party consisted of 8 individuals, each distinct in manner and motive, as Hastings observed while sipping his tea. Sir Reginald himself presided over the gathering with a forced joviality, his broad shoulders and hawk-like features dominating the terrace. Beside him sat his second wife, Lady Evelyn Ashby, a woman of striking beauty, some 20 years his junior, her delicate hands fidgeting with a pearl necklace as she smiled thinly at the guests. Her eyes, Hastings noted, darted frequently to the young man seated opposite her, Julian Carver, Sir Reginald's nephew and heir, a charming but indolent fellow of 30, whose easy smile belied a certain restlessness. Then there was Miss Clara Winthrop, a spinster of indeterminate age, whose sharp tongue and sharper eyes missed nothing. She was a distant cousin of Sir Reginald's first wife, and her presence seemed to irritate Lady Evelyn, who avoided her gaze. Dr. Lionel Grayson, the local physician, was a quiet man with a scholarly air, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose as he discussed botany with Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed friend of Lady Evelyn's, known for her love of gossip and her substantial inheritance. Major Ernest Blake, a retired, military man with a ruddy complexion and a penchant for brandy, laughed too loudly at his own jokes, while Miss Sylvia Trent, a young actress of modest fame, captivated the younger men with her vivacious charm and carefully rehearsed anecdotes. The final guest was Mr. Victor Hargreaves, Sir Reginald's solicitor, a wiry man with a meticulous manner and a habit of adjusting his cufflinks whenever conversation turned to business. Hastings, who had been invited as an old acquaintance of Major Blake's from their army days, felt oddly out of place among this assembly. He was no stranger to society gatherings, but there was something about Blackthorn Hall, Perhaps the way the shadows fell across the lawn, or the faint creak of the ancient oak doors that set his nerves on edge. The afternoon proceeded with the usual pleasantries: cucumber sandwiches, Darjeeling tea, and discussions of the weather and the latest London plays. Yet, as the clock in the hall chimed 5, Sir Reginald rose abruptly, his face flushed with something more than the warmth of the sun. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying a note of authority, "I have gathered you here not only to celebrate my birthday, but to address a matter of grave importance." The guests fell silent, their expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Lady Evelyn's hand tightened on her necklace, and Julian Carver's smile faltered. "It has come to my attention," Sir Reginald continued, "that certain discrepancies have arisen in the management of my estate. I intend to resolve these matters this weekend, and I expect your full cooperation." His gaze swept over the group, lingering on Julian and Mr. Hargreaves. The solicitor shifted uncomfortably, while Julian lit a cigarette with studied nonchalance. Miss Winthrop's eyes gleamed with interest, and Major Blake muttered something about damned impertinence. Hastings, seated near the edge of the terrace, felt a chill despite the mild weather. Sir Reginald's words were vague, yet they carried a weight that suggested secrets long buried were about to surface. The conversation resumed, but the mood had shifted. Lady Evelyn excused herself to check on the dinner arrangements, and Julian wandered off toward the rose garden, his cigarette smoke trailing behind him. Dr. Grayson and Mrs. Langley exchanged a glance that Hastings could not interpret, while Miss Trent launched into a story about her latest theatrical triumph, her voice a touch too bright. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the terrace, Hastings found himself reflecting on the curious assembly. Each guest, he realized, had a connection to Sir Reginald, whether through family, finance, or friendship, and each seemed to carry a private burden. He wondered what Poirot would make of it all. Poirot, with his uncanny ability to see through the veneer of politeness to the truths beneath. Dinner was announced at 7:30 p.m., and the guests moved to the grand dining room, where crystal chandeliers glittered above a mahogany table set with silver and fine china. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a claret of exceptional vintage. But the atmosphere remained strained. Sir Reginald spoke little, his eyes fixed on some distant point, while Lady Evelyn's laughter sounded forced. Julian, seated next to Miss Trent, flirted shamelessly, though his glances toward his uncle were wary. Miss Winthrop, ever observant, remarked dryly on the quality of the wine, prompting a curt response from Sir Reginald. It was just after the dessert course, at precisely 9:12 p.m., that the evening took a darker turn. A piercing scream echoed from the upper floor, followed by a heavy thud. The guests froze, forks clattering against plates. Lady Evelyn rose, her face pale, and Sir Reginald barked, "What the devil?" Before anyone could move, the butler, a stooped man named Perkins, appeared at the dining-room door, his hands trembling. "Sir," he stammered, it's in the study." "You must come at once." Hastings followed the others as they hurried upstairs, his heart pounding. The study door stood ajar, and inside, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay Sir Reginald's valet Thomas Reed, a quiet man who had served the household for 20 years. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, a crimson stain spreading across his shirt front. A letter opener, its handle encrusted with garnets, lay beside him, glinting in the lamplight. Lady Evelyn gasped, clutching Julian's arm. Miss Winthrop's lips tightened. And Doctor. Grayson knelt beside the body, his fingers searching for a pulse. "He's dead," the doctor confirmed, his voice steady but grim. "Stabbed, by the look of it. No more than a few minutes ago." The room erupted in murmurs of shock and suspicion. Major Blake demanded to know who had last seen the valet, while Mr. Hargreaves adjusted his cufflinks furiously, muttering about calling the police. Hastings, standing near the doorway, noted the position of the body, the open window, and the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. His thoughts turned inevitably to his friend, Hercule Poirot. This was precisely the sort of puzzle that would delight the little Belgian detective. A murder in a grand house, surrounded by secrets and lies. As the guests retreated to the drawing-room to await the police, Hastings resolved to send a telegram to Poirot at the earliest opportunity. Blackthorn Hall, with its elegant facade and hidden tensions, was about to become the stage for a most intriguing investigation. Chapter 2. The Crime. The drawing-room at Blackthorn Hall, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished oak panelling, seemed to close in around the guests as they gathered in the aftermath of the grim discovery. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and the faint tang of fear. Captain Hastings stood near the fireplace, his eyes flitting from one face to another, noting the strained expressions and nervous gestures of the assembled company. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked relentlessly, marking 9:47 p.m., each second amplifying the tension that hung over the room like a storm cloud. Sir Reginald Ashby, his face ashen but his posture rigid, stood by the window, staring out into the darkened gardens as if answers might be found in the shadows beyond. Lady Evelyn sat on a chaise longue, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her earlier poise replaced by a pallor that made her seem almost ghostly. Julian Carver, lounging in an armchair with a cigarette dangling from his lips, affected an air of indifference, but Hastings noticed the slight tremor in his fingers as he flicked ash into a crystal tray. Miss Clara Winthrop, perched on the edge of a sofa, observed the scene with the keen interest of a hawk, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Dr. Lionel Grayson, still composed despite his grim task in the study, murmured something to Mrs. Beatrice Langley, who dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her sobs more theatrical than heartfelt. Major Ernest Blake paced near the door, muttering about blasted incompetence and the need for action, while Miss Sylvia Trent, the actress, leaned against a bookcase, her face pale, but her posture carefully arranged for effect. Mr. Victor Hargreaves, the solicitor, stood apart, his cufflinks glinting as he adjusted them yet again, his expression unreadable. The local police had been summoned, but Blackthorn Hall was some miles from the nearest village, and it would be at least an hour before they arrived. In the meantime, Perkins the butler had been instructed to secure the study, though Hastings doubted the man's trembling hands were capable of much. The guests had been asked to remain in the drawing-room, a request that seemed to chafe at their nerves, judging by the restless shifting and whispered exchanges. Hastings, ever practical, had slipped away briefly to send a telegram to Hercule Poirot, urging his friend to come at once. He had no doubt that Poirot, with his meticulous mind and unerring instinct for human nature, would unravel the mystery of Thomas Reed's death. For now, though, Hastings could only observe, his soldier's training prompting him to catalogue every detail. The heavy tick of the clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, the way Lady Evelyn's eyes avoided her husband's. It was Sir Reginald who broke the silence, his voice cutting through the room. Like a whip. "This is intolerable," he declared, turning from the window. "Thomas was a loyal man, a good servant. Who could have done this, and in my own house?" His gaze swept over the guests, accusatory and fierce. "One of you must know something." "Really, Reginald," Lady Evelyn said, her voice trembling but sharp, "must you make such accusations?" "We're all as shocked as you are." "Are we?" Miss Winthrop interjected, her tone dry as autumn leaves. "Some of us, perhaps, are more shocked than others." Thomas Reed was not a man to make enemies, yet here he lies, stabbed in the heart. Curious, don't you think? Her words hung in the air, and Hastings noted the reactions they provoked. Julian's cigarette paused halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowing. Mrs. Langley let out a small gasp, her handkerchief fluttering. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his expression thoughtful, while Major Blake stopped pacing long enough to scowl at Miss Winthrop. "What are you implying, Clara?" the Major demanded. "If you've something to say, out with it." "I imply nothing," Miss Winthrop replied coolly. "I merely observe." Thomas was in his study, alone, at a time when we were all at dinner, or so we claim. Yet someone was with him, someone with a letter opener and a motive. "Enough of this," Sir Reginald snapped. "We'll wait for the police to sort it out." "They'll want statements, alibis," he faltered, as if the word alibis had conjured an unpleasant thought. "Alibis," Julian drawled, exhaling a plume of smoke. "What a quaint notion! As if any of us would admit to sneaking off to commit murder. Really, Uncle, you do have a flair for the dramatic." Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed. "Julian, this is hardly the time for your levity." "Isn't it?" he countered, his smile sharp. "Poor Thomas is dead, and we're all sitting here like characters in a melodrama, waiting for the curtain to fall. Perhaps we should start confessing our sins now. Save the police the trouble." Hastings frowned, sensing the undercurrent of hostility in Julian's words. The young man's nonchalance was a mask, he was certain. But for what? Guilt, fear, or simply disdain for his uncle's authority? He made a mental note to mention it to Poirot when he arrived. The conversation was interrupted by Perkins, who entered with a tray of brandy, his hands steadier now, but his face still pale. "For the nerves, sir," he murmured to Sir Reginald, who nodded curtly and took a glass. The others followed suit, though Miss Trent declined with a delicate shudder, and Miss Winthrop accepted hers with a raised eyebrow, as if questioning the butler's motives. Hastings took the opportunity to study the room more closely. The drawing-room was opulent, with gilded mirrors and a portrait of Sir Reginald's first wife, Margaret, gazing down with serene disapproval. A mahogany writing desk stood in one corner, its surface cluttered with papers and an inkstand. A grandfather clock loomed against the far wall, its pendulum swinging with relentless precision. Hastings noted the time, 10:03 p.m., and wondered if anyone had been absent from the dining room long enough to slip upstairs to the study. The meal had been served promptly at 7:30, with dessert concluding just before the scream at 9:12. A narrow window, but not impossible. his thoughts were interrupted by Dr. Grayson, who approached him quietly. "Captain Hastings," the doctor said in a low voice, "I couldn't help but overhear you mention a detective friend earlier. This Poirot, you called him? Is he truly as remarkable as you claim?" Hastings smiled, a touch of pride in his voice. "More so, Doctor. Poirot has a mind like no other. He sees what others miss, hears what goes unsaid. If anyone can make sense of this tragedy, it's him." Grayson nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let us hope he arrives soon, then. The sooner this matter is resolved, the better." Before Hastings could respond, the distant sound of a motor-car engine broke the silence, followed by the crunch of gravel on the drive. The police, it seemed, had arrived. Sir Reginald strode to the door, his authority reasserting itself. "Perkins, show them in, and no one is to leave this room until I say so." As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Hastings felt a surge of anticipation. The police would do their duty, no doubt, but it was Poirot's arrival he awaited. The little Belgian, with his impeccable suits and his infuriatingly precise habits, would bring order to this chaos. Until then, Hastings resolved to keep his eyes and ears open, for even now he suspected the murderer was among them, watching, waiting, and perhaps planning their next move. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The heavy oak doors of Blackthorn Hall creaked open at precisely 10:37 p.m., admitting a gust of cool night air, and the unmistakable figure of Hercule Poirot. Captain Hastings, standing near the drawing-room's fireplace, felt a surge of relief at the sight of his friend. Poirot, diminutive yet commanding, stood in the doorway, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache impeccably waxed, and his green eyes sharp with curiosity. He carried a small valise, and his overcoat was draped neatly over one arm, as if he had stepped not from a dusty motor-car, but from a Parisian salon. "Mon ami Hastings!" Poirot exclaimed, his voice warm but tinged with the faintest reproach, as if Hastings had been remiss in summoning him to such a scene. "You send for Poirot in the midst of tragedy, and yet you stand there with the air of a man who has misplaced his umbrella. Tell me, what is this catastrophe that demands my little grey cells?" Hastings hurried forward, shaking Poirot's hand with enthusiasm. "Poirot! Thank heavens you're here!" "It's murder. Sir Reginald's valet, Thomas Reed, stabbed in the study not 2 hours ago. The police have just arrived, but I knew you'd see things they'd miss." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, though his expression remained composed. "Murder, you say, in this grande maison? Très intéressant. And who are these people who surround you, Hastings? Introduce me, if you please, for I must know the players in this drame." The room had fallen silent at Poirot's entrance. The guest's eyes fixed on the small, fastidious man who seemed to radiate an authority disproportionate to his stature. The local police inspector, a burly man named Inspector Norris, paused in his conversation with Sir Reginald to regard Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and scepticism. Hastings quickly made the introductions, noting the varied reactions. Sir Reginald's curt nod, Lady Evelyn's nervous glance, Julian Carver's raised eyebrow, and Miss Clara Winthrop's appraising stare. Dr. Grayson inclined his head politely. Mrs. Langley sniffed as if offended by the interruption. Major Blake muttered something about foreigners, and Miss Sylvia Trent offered a dazzling smile that Poirot acknowledged with a slight bow. Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor, adjusted his cufflinks and said nothing. "Enchanté," Poirot said, his voice smooth as he surveyed the group. "I am Hercule Poirot, a detective of some small reputation. Captain Hastings has informed me of the unfortunate event, and with your permission, Monsieur Ashby, I should like to assist the good Inspector Norris in his inquiries." Sir Reginald, still pale but regaining his composure, waved a hand. "Do as you like, Mr. Poirot. The sooner this is cleared up, the better. Thomas was a good man, and I want his killer found." Inspector Norris cleared his throat, his tone gruff. "No offence, Mr. Poirot, but this is a police matter. We've got everything under control. The coroner's on his way, and we'll have statements from everyone soon enough." Poirot smiled, a small disarming gesture that Hastings knew concealed an iron will. "Of course, Inspector. I do not interfere. I merely offer my services, for I have found that the human mind, it is a complex thing, and sometimes the smallest detail, unregard, a word misplaced, reveals the truth." Norris grunted, clearly unimpressed, but made no further objection. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice lowering. "Now, mon ami, tell me everything. From the beginning, if you please, and omit nothing." Hastings recounted the events of the evening, the uneasy gathering on the terrace, Sir Reginald's cryptic announcement about estate discrepancies, the dinner, the scream at 9:12 p.m., and the discovery of Thomas Reed's body in the study, stabbed with a garnet-encrusted letter opener. He described the guests, their behaviours, and the faint scent of tobacco he had noticed in the study, though he admitted he was unsure of its significance. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Hastings finished, Poirot nodded. "Bon, the picture, it begins to form. A valet, a man of loyalty, killed in a private study with a weapon of opportunity. And this gathering, such a mélange of motives, n'est-ce pas? Tell me, Hastings, who was absent from the dining room during the meal?" Hastings frowned, thinking back. "No one, as far as I could tell. We were all seated when the scream came, just after dessert. Though Lady Evelyn did leave briefly to check on the arrangements, and Julian stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette at one point. I can't be certain of the exact times, précision, Hastings, precision," Poirot chided gently. "The times, they are everything. We must establish the alibis, the movements, and this letter opener, did it belong to the study?" "I believe so," Hastings replied. "It was on the desk when I saw it. Sir Reginald used it often, I'm told." "Intéressant," Poirot murmured. He turned to Inspector Norris, who was now conferring with a constable near the door. "Inspector, may I see the scene of the crime?" "It is often the place itself that speaks the loudest." Norris hesitated, then shrugged. "Very well, but don't touch anything." "The coroner needs a clean scene." Poirot inclined his head and gestured for Hastings to follow. They ascended the grand staircase to the study, where a constable stood guard. The room was as Hastings had described. A heavy oak desk, cluttered with papers, a leather armchair, bookshelves lining the walls, and the body of Thomas Reed, now covered with a sheet lying on the Persian rug. The garnet-encrusted letter opener lay where it had fallen, its blade stained with blood. The window was open, a cool breeze stirring the curtains. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes scanning every detail. He paused by the desk, noting the scattered papers, an inkstand, and a half-burnt cigarette in an ashtray. Tabac, he murmured, sniffing the air. The same scent you mentioned, Hastings. And yet, the valet, did he smoke? I don't know, Hastings admitted. He was a quiet man, who kept to himself. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the window. He examined the sill, then leaned out slightly, peering into the darkness. The ground below is soft, yes? But no footprints, I think. The murderer, he did not escape this way. He turned back to the room, his eyes narrowing as he studied the body's position. The blow was precise, to the heart. A single thrust, no hesitation. This was not a crime of passion, Hastings, but of calculation. He knelt beside the sheet, lifting it briefly to examine the wound, then replaced it with care. The letter opener. It is heavy, ornamental, not a weapon one carries by chance. It suggests the killer was in the study already, or knew it well. Hastings felt a chill. You mean one of the guests? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It is too early to say, mon ami. But the circle, it is closed, yes? No one has left the house, and the servants, they are accounted for. Perkins said all the staff were in the kitchen or serving during dinner, Hastings replied. Though I suppose we should confirm that. We shall, Poirot said firmly. Every detail, every moment must be verified. The truth, it hides in the contradictions, in the things that do not fit. As they returned to the drawing-room, Poirot's demeanour was calm but purposeful. The guests were still there, their nerves fraying under the strain of waiting. Inspector Norris was taking preliminary statements, his notebook open as he questioned Sir Reginald. Poirot did not interrupt but stood quietly, his eyes moving from face to face, as if reading the secrets each sought to conceal. Hastings knew that look. Poirot was already at work, his mind sifting through the chaos of human motives and lies, piecing together the puzzle that would reveal a murderer. The little Belgian had arrived, and Blackthorn Hall would never be the same. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The drawing-room at Blackthorn Hall, bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, had taken on an air of oppressive stillness by 11:15 p.m. The guests, confined to the room by Inspector Norris's orders, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier decorum fraying under the weight of suspicion. Captain Hastings stood near the door, watching as Hercule Poirot began his methodical inquiry, his presence like a calm centre in the storm of unease. The little Belgian detective moved with deliberate grace, his eyes sharp and his voice measured, as he addressed the group with a disarming politeness that Hastings knew concealed a relentless pursuit of truth. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, standing before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. A tragedy has occurred in this house, and it is my intention, with the permission of Inspector Norris, to assist in uncovering the truth. The death of Monsieur Thomas Reed was no accident, and the one who committed this act is, I believe, among us. I ask for your cooperation in answering my questions, for it is in the small details, the gesture, the word, the moment, that the truth reveals itself. Inspector Norris, seated at the writing desk with his notebook, gave a grudging nod, though his expression suggested he found Poirot's theatrics unnecessary. The guests, however, were riveted, their faces a study in varied emotions. Sir Reginald's scowl, Lady Evelyn's nervous fidgeting, Julian Carver's sardonic half-smile, and Miss Clara Winthrop's keen interest, as if she were evaluating Poirot's performance. Poirot began with Sir Reginald, his tone deferential yet probing. Monsieur Ashby, you spoke earlier of discrepancies in the management of your estate. Can you tell Poirot what these discrepancies were and why they required such a gathering? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering toward Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor, who sat stiffly in a corner. "It's a private matter," Sir Reginald said curtly. "Financial irregularities, that's all. I intended to discuss them with Hargreaves and Julian this weekend. It has no bearing on Thomas's death, perhaps," Poirot said smoothly, "but all things they connect, no? And your valet, Thomas Reed, he was aware of these irregularities?" Sir Reginald hesitated, then shook his head. "Thomas was a servant, not a confidant, handled my personal affairs. Clothes, correspondence, that sort of thing. He wouldn't have known about the estate." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Lady Evelyn. "Madame, you left the dining-room briefly during the meal, I am told. To check on the arrangements, yes? Can you recall the precise time?" Lady Evelyn's fingers twisted her pearl necklace, her eyes darting to her husband. I suppose it was around 8 o'clock, perhaps a bit later. I was only gone a moment, to speak with the housekeeper about the dessert service. And you saw no one upstairs? Heard nothing unusual?" Poirot's voice was gentle, but his gaze was piercing. "Nothing," she replied quickly, too quickly, Hastings thought. "I returned straight to the dining room." Poirot's eyes lingered on her for a moment before moving to Julian Carver. "Monsieur Carver, you stepped out to the terrace for a cigarette, I believe. At what time was this, and did you see or hear anything that might aid us?" Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his posture relaxed, but his eyes wary. "Must have been around 8:30, I'd say. I needed a breath of air. Dinner was getting a bit stuffy. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Just smoked and came back. And yet," Poirot said, his tone light, "there was a cigarette in the study, half burned, with the scent of your brand, monsieur. Curious, no?" Julian's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Plenty of people smoke, Mr. Poirot. I wasn't the only one with a cigarette tonight." "Indeed," Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. He turned to Miss Winthrop, whose sharp eyes had not left him since he began. "Mademoiselle, you are observant, I think. Did you notice anything unusual during the dinner? Any absence or behaviour that struck you?" Miss Winthrop's lips curved in a faint smile, as if she appreciated the question. "I noticed many things, Mr. Poirot. For instance, I noticed that Mr. Hargreaves was unusually quiet even for a solicitor, and that Mrs. Langley seemed more interested in Julian's conversation than in her own. But as for absences, I can only say that Lady Evelyn and Julian were briefly gone, as they've admitted. The rest of us were at the table when the scream came at 9:12. "Précisément," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The scream at 9:12. And you, Dr. Grayson, you examined the body. Can you confirm the time of death?" Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his voice steady. "Based on the body's warmth and the state of the wound, I'd estimate death occurred between 9 and 9:15 p.m. The stab was clean, directly to the heart. He would have died almost instantly." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly against his chin. "And the letter opener, it was taken from the desk in the study." "So it seems, Doctor." Grayson replied, "It was Sir Reginald's, I believe." Sir Reginald confirmed this with a grunt, kept it on my desk for years." "Anyone could have picked it up, anyone in the study," Poirot corrected gently. He continued his inquiries, questioning Mrs. Langley about her conversations at dinner. She claimed to have discussed only trivialities. Major Blake about his movements. He insisted he'd been at the table all evening, though he admitted to a brief visit to the lavatory, and Miss Trent about her observations. She offered a vague account of the dinner, her eyes wide with theatrical innocence. Mr. Hargreaves, when pressed, admitted to handling some of Sir Reginald's financial papers earlier that day, but denied entering the study after dinner. As Poirot questioned each guest, Hastings watched closely, noting the subtle shifts in demeanour. Lady Evelyn's hands trembled slightly when asked about her movements, and Julian's casual air seemed forced when the cigarette was mentioned. Miss Winthrop's responses were precise, almost too precise, as if she were measuring her words. The others, Grayson, Langley, Blake and Trent, offered little of substance, but Hastings sensed they were all holding something back, their secrets coiled like springs. Poirot concluded his initial round of questions by addressing the butler, Perkins, who stood nervously by the door. "Monsieur Perkins, you heard the scream and found the body." "Were all the servants in the kitchen during the dinner?" "Yes, sir," Perkins replied, his voice quavering. "The maids, the cook, the footman. We were all downstairs, preparing the dessert or cleaning. No one went upstairs until I heard the scream and ran to the study, and the study door," Poirot pressed. "It was ajar when you arrived?" "Yes, sir." "Just a crack." "I pushed it open and saw him." Perkins swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a gesture. He turned to Inspector Norris, who had been scribbling notes throughout. "Inspector, I suggest we verify the alibis with the servants and examine the study further. The hour grows late, and the truth, it does not wait." Norris grumbled but agreed, assigning a constable to fetch the servants' statements. Poirot, meanwhile, caught Hastings's eye and gave a slight nod, a signal that he had already begun to form a theory. As the guests dispersed to their rooms under police supervision, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor. His curiosity piqued. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" he asked in a low voice. "There's something off about this whole affair. The cigarette, the letter opener, Sir Reginald's talk of discrepancies, it all feels connected." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You are learning, mon ami. Yes, it is connected, but the connections, they are not yet clear. The cigarette, it is a clue, but to what? The letter opener, it is a weapon of convenience, yet chosen with purpose. And the scream, why a scream, Hastings? Did the victim cry out? Or was it another? We must observe, we must think, and we must not assume." Hastings nodded, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. Poirot, he knew, was only beginning, and the questions he had asked were but the first steps in unravelling the tangled web of Blackthorn Hall. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The clock in the grand hall of Blackthorn Hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors, as Captain Hastings followed Hercule Poirot back to the drawing-room. The police, under Inspector Norris's brusque direction, had completed their initial inspection of the study and were now questioning the servants in the kitchen. The guests, confined to their rooms for the night, had left an atmosphere thick with suspicion, and Hastings could feel the weight of it pressing on his shoulders. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, his green eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. Mon ami, Poirot said, settling into a high-backed chair by the fire. We are now at the stage where the shadows begin to take form. The murder of Thomas Reed is no random act, but the path to the truth is obscured by, what do you English call them, red herrings. We must be vigilant, Hastings, for the obvious is often the most deceptive. Hastings nodded, though he was unsure which clues Poirot considered deceptive. You mean Julian's cigarette in the study? Or Lady Evelyn's absence during dinner? They both seem suspicious to me. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. Suspicious, yes, but too convenient, perhaps. The cigarette, it is placed where we cannot miss it, and Lady Evelyn's brief absence, it is so neatly explained. The murderer, he wishes us to look in one direction while he moves in another. Let us consider the facts. He produced a small notebook from his pocket, its pages pristine, and began to jot down notes with a silver pencil. The time of death, confirmed by doctor. Grayson is between 9 o'clock and 9:15 p.m. The scream, heard at 9:12, marks the moment of discovery. The letter opener taken from the desk suggests a crime of opportunity, yet the precision of the wound speaks of intent. And the study door, ajar, suggests the killer left in haste, or wished us to believe so. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. You think the killer staged the scene? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice low. But let us examine the alibis, for they are the scaffolding of this mystery. Dinner began at 7:30 p.m. Lady Evelyn left at approximately 8, Julian at 8:30. The others claim to have remained at the table, yet we have only their word. The servants, too, were downstairs, but the kitchen is not far from the back stairs to the study. We must verify. At that moment, Inspector Norris entered, his face flushed with frustration. Mr. Poirot, I've spoken to the servants. They all confirm Perkins's story. Kitchen staff were busy with the meal. No one went upstairs until the scream. But I've got something. Else, he held up a small evidence bag containing a crumpled piece of paper. Found this in the study, tucked behind a book on the shelf. Looks like a note. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he took the bag, carefully extracting the paper with gloved fingers. It was a torn sheet bearing a few scrawled words in black ink. Meet me in the study, 9 o'clock, urgent, J. He held it to the light, his expression thoughtful. This J, it could be Julian Carver, no? Or perhaps another with the initial J. But why leave such a note where it could be found? Hastings frowned. It points straight to Julian. He was out of the dining room, and there's the cigarette. It's almost too perfect. Précisément, Poirot exclaimed, his voice sharp. The red herring, it swims before us. This note, it is meant to distract, but from what? He slipped the note back into the bag and handed it to Norris. Inspector, I suggest you keep this safe. It is a clue, but not the one it appears to be. Norris grunted, clearly skeptical, but pocketed the note. We're focusing on Carver for now. He's got no solid alibi, and that cigarette's damning. Plus, Sir Reginald's been muttering about cutting him out of the will. Gives him motive. Poirot raised a hand, his tone gentle but firm. Do not be too quick, Inspector. The obvious suspect is rarely the true one. Tell me, what have you learned of the valet, Thomas Reed? His life, his habits? Norris shrugged. Not much yet. Been with Sir Reginald for 20 years, loyal as they come. No family, no enemies, kept to himself. The servants say he was quiet, efficient, maybe a bit too nosy for his own good. Nosy? Poirot's eyebrows rose. "In what way, if you please?" "The housekeeper, missus. Dobbs said he was always listening at doors, reading letters he shouldn't. Thought he was looking for gossip to sell. Maybe intéressant," Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping his notebook. "A valet who sees and hears too much." Perhaps he heard something worth killing for Hastings, felt a chill. "You think he was killed to silence him?" "It is a possibility," Poirot said, "but we must not leap to conclusions. Let us return to the guests. Inspector, have you searched their rooms?" Norris nodded. "Just started." "Nothing yet, but we'll keep looking. Carver's room had a pack of the same cigarettes as the one in the study, but that's hardly proof." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the others? Lady Evelyn, for instance. She wears a pearl necklace, yes? A valuable piece, perhaps a gift from Sir Reginald." "What's that got to do with anything?" Norris asked, frowning. "Everything, Inspector," Poirot replied. "The details, they are the threads of the tapestry. A necklace, a cigarette, a note. These are the pieces we must weave together." As Norris left to continue his searches, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Mon ami, the note, with the J as a distraction, but it tells us something. The killer wishes us to suspect Julian Carver, but why? To protect themselves, or to settle a score? And the cigarette, why leave it in plain sight? We must look beyond the obvious, to the motives that lie beneath." Hastings nodded, though his mind was spinning. "What's our next step, Poirot?" "We observe," Poirot said simply. "Tomorrow I shall speak again with each guest, alone. The lies, they will begin to crack under the pressure of Poirot's questions. And you, Hastings, you must watch their faces, their hands, their eyes. The body, it speaks when the tongue does not." As they prepared to retire for the night, Hastings glanced at the drawing-room clock. 12:47 a.m. The house was quiet now, but he knew the silence was deceptive. Somewhere among the guests a murderer lurked, and Poirot's arrival had set the wheels of justice in motion. The red herrings were circling, but Hastings had faith that his friend would see through them to the truth. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Hall, casting long shadows across the breakfast room where the guests had gathered, their faces drawn with fatigue and suspicion. It was 8:32 a.m. on Saturday, the 23rd of September, 1925, and the air was heavy with the unspoken tension of the previous night's tragedy. Captain Hastings, seated at the far end of the table with a cup of tepid coffee, observed the strained politeness of the group. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his moustache gleaming like a polished sabre, sat opposite, his eyes darting from one guest to another as he sipped his tisane with deliberate calm. The breakfast was a subdued affair. Toast, marmalade, and poached eggs served by a nervous footman under Perkins's watchful eye. Sir Reginald ate sparingly, his gaze fixed on his plate, while Lady Evelyn toyed with a piece of toast, her pearl necklace catching the light. Julian Carver, ever defiant, lit a cigarette despite Miss Winthrop's pointed cough, while Doctor. Grayson and Mrs. Langley exchanged murmurs about the weather. Major Blake grumbled about the lack of bacon, and Miss Sylvia Trent, her actress's poise intact, smiled faintly at nothing in particular. Mr. Hargreaves, the solicitor, was absent, having been called to assist Inspector Norris with estate documents. Poirot, who had spent the early hours reviewing his notes, broke the silence with a gentle clearing of his throat. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "I trust you have slept, though I suspect the events of last night weigh heavily. I have a small matter to discuss, a detail that perhaps you can clarify." The guests turned to him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's methods, sensed that his friend was about to unveil something significant. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small object, which he placed on the table with a flourish. A single pearl, its lustre unmistakable, resting on a folded handkerchief. Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her necklace, which now bore a noticeable gap where a pearl was missing. "That's mine!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Where did you find it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It was found, madame, in the study, near the desk where poor Monsieur Reed met his end. It is curious, no? You told Poirot you did not enter the study last night, yet this pearl, it suggests otherwise." The room fell silent, the clink of cutlery stilled. Lady Evelyn's face paled, her fingers clutching the necklace. I don't know how it got there," she stammered. "I was nowhere near the study after dinner." "Someone must have taken it, or it fell off earlier." "Earlier?" Poirot's tone was mild, but his gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, madame, you wore the necklace all evening, and it was intact at dinner. The clasp, it is secure, is it not? A pearl does not simply fall from such a piece." Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. "Evelyn, what's this about? Were you in the study?" "No!" she cried, her voice rising. "I swear I wasn't. I don't know how it got there." Julian Carver exhaled a plume of smoke, his smile sardonic. "Careful, Aunt Evelyn. You're sounding a bit desperate. Maybe you dropped it while paying a visit to poor old Thomas." "That's enough, Julian," Sir Reginald snapped. But his gaze remained on his wife, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Miss Winthrop leaned forward, her voice dry. "A pearl is a small thing to lose, Mr. Poirot, but a large thing to find in a murder scene. Are you suggesting Lady Evelyn was there when Thomas was killed?" "I suggest nothing," Poirot replied, his tone even. "I merely present the fact. The pearl. It is a clue, and it tells a story. But what story? That is what we must discover." Hastings watched the exchange, his mind racing. The pearl was a tangible clue, unlike the vague note or the cigarette, and it pointed directly to Lady Evelyn. Yet her distress seemed genuine, and Poirot's insistence on the clasp security suggested the pearl had been deliberately removed. But by whom, and why? Poirot turned to Dr. Grayson, who had been observing the scene with quiet intensity. "Doctor, you were in the study to examine the body. Did you notice this pearl perhaps on the floor?" Grayson shook his head, adjusting his spectacles. "No, Mr. Poirot. I was focused on the body and the wound. The room was cluttered, and I didn't look closely at the floor." "Cluttered," Poirot repeated, his fingers tapping his cup. "And yet the pearl was found near the desk, in plain sight. It is curious, non, that such a small object should be so easily discovered." Mrs. Langley, her handkerchief clutched tightly, spoke up, her voice quavering. "Surely it's a mistake, Mr. Poirot. Evelyn couldn't have done such a thing. She's a lady." "Indeed," Poirot said, his smile polite but enigmatic. "But the facts, they do not respect titles or sentiments. Let us consider another detail. The cigarette in the study, it matches those smoked by Monsieur Carver. Yet he claims he was on the terrace at 8:30. Tell me, Mademoiselle Trent, You were seated near the terrace doors during dinner. Did you see Monsieur Carver return?" Miss Trent's eyes widened, her actress's poise faltering for a moment. I believe so," she said, her voice hesitant. "He came back just before the dessert was served, around 9, I think. But I wasn't watching the clock. Precision, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "The time, it is everything. If Monsieur Carver returned at 9, he could not have been in the study at 9:12 when the scream was heard. Yet the cigarette suggests otherwise. A contradiction, perhaps?" Julian's smile tightened, but he said nothing, flicking ash into his saucer. Hastings noted the tension in his posture, the way his fingers gripped the cigarette. Was it guilt, or merely irritation at being scrutinized? Poirot turned to Major Blake, who had been unusually quiet. "Major, you mentioned a brief absence to the lavatory during dinner. Can you recall the time?" Blake's ruddy face flushed deeper. "Dash it all, man, I don't keep a stopwatch. Some time after 8, I suppose. Was only gone a minute or two. And you saw no one in the corridor?" Poirot pressed. "No one," Blake said gruffly. "Place was quiet as a tomb." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. A tomb, indeed. And yet a murder was committed in that quiet. The pearl, the cigarette, the note with the J. These are the threads, and they weave a pattern. But the pattern, it is not yet clear. As breakfast concluded, Inspector Norris re-entered, accompanied by Mr. Hargreaves, whose face was pale and drawn. "Mr. Poirot," Norris said, "we found something else. In Reed's room, a ledger hidden under his mattress. Looks like he was keeping notes on Sir Reginald's finances. Dates, sums, names, including yours, Mr. Hargreaves." The solicitor's eyes widened, his cufflinks forgotten. "That's preposterous. I had no dealings with Reed beyond my duties for Sir Reginald. And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft, "the valet, he was curious, no? Perhaps too curious. This ledger, Inspector, may I see it?" Norris hesitated, then nodded, handing over a small, leather-bound book. Poirot flipped through its pages, his eyes scanning the neat rows of figures and cryptic notations. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the little grey cells, they begin to work. This ledger, it is a window into the secrets of Blackthorn Hall." Hastings leaned closer, catching a glimpse of names. Hargreaves, Julian, even Sir Reginald, alongside sums of money and dates, stretching back months. "What does it mean, Poirot?" he whispered. "It means," Poirot replied, closing the ledger with a snap, "that Thomas Reed knew more than he should, and someone, perhaps, could not allow him to know it any longer." As the guests dispersed, their faces clouded with unease, Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor, his mind buzzing with the new clues. The pearl, the ledger, the cigarette, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Poirot, however, seemed undaunted, his mind already sifting through the contradictions, seeking the truth hidden in the details. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The late morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Hall's library, where Hercule Poirot had requested a private meeting with each guest. It was 11:03 a.m., and the house, though bustling with police activity, seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the next revelation. Captain Hastings stood by a bookcase, pretending to examine a volume of Dickens while watching Poirot at work. The little Belgian detective sat at a polished table, his notebook open, his silver pencil poised, his demeanour as calm and precise as a watchmaker, assembling a delicate mechanism. The library, with its towering shelves and leather-bound tomes, was a fitting stage for Poirot's interrogations. The air smelled of old paper and wax polish, and the faint creak of the floorboards underfoot added to the atmosphere of unease. Inspector Norris had reluctantly agreed to let Poirot conduct these interviews, provided a constable was present to take notes. The constable, a young man named Willis, sat in a corner, his pencil scratching diligently as Poirot began with Mr. Victor Hargreaves, the solicitor whose name had appeared in Thomas Reed's hidden ledger. "Monsieur Hargreaves," Poirot said, his voice smooth but edged with purpose. "The ledger found in the valet's room contains your name, alongside sums of money and dates. You told us you had no dealings with Reed beyond your duties for Sir Reginald, yet the ledger suggests otherwise. Can you explain?" Hargreaves's thin face tightened, his fingers instinctively adjusting his cufflinks. "I've already said, Mr. Poirot, I know nothing about that ledger. Reed must have been spying, jotting down things he overheard. I manage Sir Reginald's finances, investments, property transactions. It's only natural my name would appear in his notes." "Natural, perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "but the sums, they are substantial, and some are marked with the word discrepancy. This is the same word Sir Reginald used yesterday, when he spoke of estate matters. Were you aware of these discrepancies?" Hargreaves hesitated, his gaze flickering to the constable. I was reviewing some accounts for Sir Reginald, yes. There were irregularities. Small errors in the books, nothing serious. I was addressing them small errors." Poirot's tone was deceptively mild. "Yet Sir Reginald called this gathering to discuss them, and now his valet, who kept a secret ledger, is dead. You will forgive Poirot if he finds this curious." Hargreaves's lips pressed into a thin line, but he offered no further explanation. Poirot made a note, then dismissed him with a nod, his eyes already turning to the next guest, Lady Evelyn Ashby. Lady Evelyn entered, her movements graceful, but her face pale, the gap in her pearl necklace starkly visible. She sat, her hands clasped tightly as Poirot fixed her with his piercing gaze. "Madame," he began, "the pearl found in the study remains a puzzle. You insist you were not there, yet the evidence suggests otherwise. Tell me, was there any reason for you to visit the study last night? Perhaps to speak with Thomas Reed?" Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. "No, I told you, I wasn't there. I don't know how the pearl got there. Someone must have taken it, stolen it, perhaps to make me look guilty." "Stolen?" Poirot tilted his head, his moustache twitching. "A single pearl, removed so carefully from a secure clasp? It is unlikely, madame, but let us consider another possibility. You and the valet. Did you ever speak privately, perhaps about matters of the household?" Lady Evelyn's hands trembled, and she looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas was observant. He sometimes made comments, things he'd noticed, about me, about others. I told him to mind his place." "And what had he noticed about you?" Poirot pressed, his voice gentle but unrelenting. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing important. Gossip, that's all. Servants' talk." Poirot made another note, his expression unreadable, and dismissed her. Hastings, watching from the bookcase, sensed she was holding something back, something that made her fear the valet's knowledge. He leaned toward Poirot, whispering, "She's nervous, Poirot. That pearl, it's damning." "Patience, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "The pearl? It is a clue, but not the whole story. The truth lies in what isn't said." Next came Julian Carver, his casual air strained as he slouched into the chair. Poirot wasted no time. "Monsieur Carver, the cigarette in the study, the note signed J, these point to you. Yet you claim you were on the terrace at 8:30. Can anyone confirm this?" Julian smirked, though his eyes were wary. "Afraid not, Mr. Poirot. I was alone, enjoying a smoke. But I didn't write any note. and I didn't go to the study. Someone's trying to pin this on me, and I'd wager it's because of Uncle's threats to cut me out of the will." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Threats? This is new. Tell me, what did Sir Reginald say?" Julian shrugged, lighting another cigarette. "He's been grumbling for weeks about my extravagant habits. Said he'd leave the estate to charity if I didn't shape up. Old news, really, yet not so old," Poirot said. "If it gave you motive to silence a valet who might have known too much. The ledger mentions your name, monsieur, with sums withdrawn from the estate." Julian's smile vanished. "What? That's nonsense! I never touched the estate funds. If Reed wrote that, he was lying, or someone put him up to it." Poirot nodded, jotting a note, and dismissed Julian. As the young man left, Hastings whispered, "He's rattled, Poirot. That ledger's got him worried." "Oui," Poirot agreed, "but worry is not guilt. The ledger, it reveals secrets, but whose?" Let us continue. Miss Clara Winthrop entered next, her sharp eyes meeting Poirot's with a hint of challenge. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "you're observant, a quality I admire. The ledger mentions a payment to C.W. Your initials, perhaps. Can you explain?" Miss Winthrop's lips curved faintly. "I'm flattered to be noticed, Mr. Poirot, but I've no dealings with Sir Reginald's finances. If my initials are there, it's coincidence or malice. Thomas Reed was a sneaky sort, always eavesdropping. Perhaps he fabricated entries to stir trouble." Poirot's gaze held hers. "And did he stir trouble with you, mademoiselle? Did he know something you wished kept secret?" Her smile tightened, but she replied coolly, "If he did, he never said so. I keep my affairs private, Mr. Poirot." The interviews continued, each guest revealing a fragment of truth laced with evasion. Dr. Grayson admitted to prescribing sedatives for Lady Evelyn, hinting at her nervous disposition. Mrs. Langley confessed to overhearing a heated argument between Sir Reginald and Julian days earlier, though she claimed not to know the details. Major Blake blustered about his loyalty to Sir Reginald, but his vague recollection of the dinner's timeline raised Poirot's suspicions. Miss Trent, with theatrical flair, denied any knowledge of the ledger or the study, though her eyes lingered on Julian as she spoke. As the last guest left, Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "the lies, they multiply like shadows. The ledger, the pearl, the cigarette, they are threads, but they are tangled. Someone in this house knew Thomas Reed was prying, and that knowledge cost him his life." Hastings frowned. "But who, Poirot?" "Julian's the obvious suspect with the cigarette and the note. But you said it's a red herring." "Oui," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The obvious, it is a trap. But the ledger, it is the key. It points to secrets of money, of betrayal, perhaps of love. We must dig deeper, Hastings, into the hearts of those who hide behind their lies." As they left the library, the clock struck noon, and Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer. The lies were surfacing, but the truth remained just out of reach, lurking in the shadows of Blackthorn Hall. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The afternoon of Saturday, September 23rd, 1925, settled over Blackthorn Hall with a deceptive calm, the golden light of autumn filtering through the tall windows of the drawing-room. It was 2:14 p.m., and the guests, still confined to the estate by Inspector Norris's orders, had gathered once more, their nerves frayed by the relentless scrutiny of the past 18 hours. Captain Hastings stood near the grand piano, his eyes scanning the group, noting the tension in their postures and the fleeting glances they exchanged. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap, observed the scene with the quiet intensity of a chess master awaiting his opponent's move. The air was heavy with unspoken accusations, and the discovery of Thomas Reed's ledger, with its cryptic entries of names and sums, had cast a shadow over the household. Poirot, ever methodical, had spent the morning reviewing the ledger's contents with Inspector Norris, who was growing increasingly impatient with the lack of a clear suspect. The constable, Willis, stood by the door, his notebook ready, while Perkins, the butler, hovered nervously, offering tea that no one touched. Poirot rose, his small frame commanding the room's attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and measured, "we have learned much, yet the truth remains elusive. The ledger of Monsieur Reed reveals secrets, financial, personal, perhaps dangerous. But secrets, they are like wounds. They fester until they are exposed. I ask you now to speak plainly, for the time for concealment is past." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces a gallery of unease. Sir Reginald, his jaw set, glared at Poirot, while Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened on her teacup, her necklace, repaired now, gleaming at her throat. Julian Carver lit another cigarette. His eyes narrowed, while Miss Clara Winthrop's sharp gaze met Poirot's with a hint of defiance. Dr. Grayson adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Langley clutched her handkerchief. Major Blake muttered under his breath, and Miss Sylvia Trent's smile was strained, her actress's poise faltering. It was Mrs. Beatrice Langley who broke first, her voice trembling as she rose from her seat, her handkerchief fluttering like a white flag. "I can't bear this any longer," she cried, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thomas Reed, he knew things he shouldn't have. He was always listening, always watching. He knew about me, about my money." The room froze, every eye turning to her. Hastings felt a jolt of surprise. Mrs. Langley, with her penchant for gossip and her theatrical displays, had seemed the least likely to harbour a significant secret. Poirot tilted his head, his expression one of polite curiosity. "Madame Langley, what is it that the valet knew? Speak, if you please, and let us have the truth." Mrs. Langley's sobs grew louder, her words spilling out, in a rush. "He knew about my investments, my inheritance. I made some poor decisions, trusted the wrong people. There were losses, significant losses, and I didn't want anyone to know, especially Sir Reginald. Thomas overheard me speaking with Mr. Hargreaves about it, weeks ago, in this very room. He hinted that he could keep quiet for a price. Blackmail." Poirot's voice was sharp, his eyes gleaming. "You are saying that Thomas Reed attempted to extort money from you?" Mrs. Langley nodded, her face crumpling. "He never asked outright, but he made it clear he knew, and he'd tell unless I paid him. I gave him a little, some jewellery, small sums, but he wanted more. I was terrified he'd ruin me." Sir Reginald's face darkened, his voice a low growl. "You mean to say that my valet was a blackmailer? In my own house?" "It's true," Mrs. Langley cried, turning to him. "I'm not the only one, I'm sure of it. He was always snooping, always writing in that wretched ledger. He knew things about all of us." The room erupted in murmurs, the guests exchanging wary glances. Hastings watched closely, noting Julian's sudden stillness, the way his cigarette hung forgotten in his hand. Lady Evelyn's teacup rattled in its saucer, and Miss Winthrop's eyes narrowed, as if weighing Mrs. Langley's confession against her own secrets. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Madam, this is most illuminating. The ledger, it contains entries for BL, your initials perhaps. Payments marked as private. Were these the sums you paid to Reed?" Mrs. Langley hesitated, then nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I didn't want anyone to know. I thought if I paid him, he'd stop. And did he? Poirot pressed, his gaze unrelenting. No, she whispered. He kept asking for more. I didn't know what to do. Poirot made a note, his expression thoughtful. Merci, madame. Your honesty, it is a step toward the truth. But let us consider. If Thomas Reed was a blackmailer, he had enemies among you. Who else did he approach? The question hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Then, to Hastings's surprise, Miss Sylvia Trent rose, her face pale but her voice steady. He spoke to me too, she said, her actress's poise giving way to a quiet intensity. Not blackmail exactly, but he knew about my career, about a scandal I'd rather forget. A role I took years ago, in a play that was less than reputable. He hinted he could sell the story to the papers, ruin my reputation. I told him I had nothing to give him, but he just smiled and said, "We'll see." Hastings felt a pang of sympathy for the young actress, whose carefully crafted image was now at risk. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "And when was this conversation, mademoiselle?" "A week ago," she replied, "here in the garden." He was polishing Reginald's shoes, and he just started talking, as if he'd been waiting for me. Poirot nodded, jotting another note. "And did you tell anyone of this encounter?" Miss Trent shook her head. "No, I was ashamed, and I hoped, he was bluffing." The confession sparked a ripple of unease. Major Blake, his face red, burst out, "This is outrageous! Are we to believe that half the household was being blackmailed by a valet? I never spoke to the man beyond ordering a drink." "And yet," Poirot said, turning to him, "you were absent from the dinner table, Major, if only briefly. Did Reed perhaps know something about you? A debt, perhaps? Or a secret from your military days?" Blake's eyes widened, his bluster faltering. "I've no secrets worth killing for, Poirot. I'm a straightforward man, always have been, perhaps," Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. "The ledger, the pearl, the cigarette, the note. These are the pieces, but the motive, it lies in the secrets Thomas Reed uncovered. He was a man who listened, who watched, and who profited from what he learned. One of you, perhaps, could not allow his knowledge to spread." Lady Evelyn's teacup slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. "I can't stand this," she cried, her voice breaking. "All these accusations, these insinuations, it's unbearable." "I didn't kill him, I swear it." Sir Reginald moved to her side, his hand on her shoulder, but his expression was cold. "Evelyn, calm yourself. No one's accusing you, are they not?" she shot back, her eyes wild. "That pearl, that wretched pearl, someone put it there to make me look guilty." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And who, madame, would wish to do such a thing? And why?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. I just want this to be over." As Perkins hurried to clean up the broken china, Hastings caught Poirot's eye. The little Belgian's expression was unreadable, but Hastings knew his friend was piecing together the puzzle. Mrs. Langley's and Miss Trent's confessions had cracked the facade of Blackthorn Hall, revealing a web of secrets that Thomas Reed had exploited. The emotional weight of their revelations had shifted the investigation, and Hastings sensed that Poirot was closer to the truth than ever before. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured as the guests dispersed, "the masks they are slipping. The blackmail, it is the key. But who else did Reed threaten? And how far would they go to protect their secrets?" Hastings nodded, his mind racing. The truth was near, but the shadows of Blackthorn Hall still held their secrets tightly. Chapter 9. The Trap. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Blackthorn Hall, its golden rays doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the household. It was 4:22 p.m. on Saturday, September 23rd, 1925, and the tension in the drawing room was palpable as Hercule Poirot prepared to set his trap. Captain Hastings stood near the grand fireplace, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had seen Poirot orchestrate such moments before, carefully staged gatherings where the little Belgian's psychological acumen would coax the truth from even the most guarded suspect. Today, Poirot's demeanour was as composed as ever, but his green eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity that suggested he was closing in on the murderer. The guests had been summoned back to the drawing room under the pretext of a final round of questions, before Inspector Norris concluded his initial investigation. The inspector, looking weary but resolute, stood near the door with Constable Willis, his notebook at the ready. The guests filed in, their faces a mixture of dread and defiance. Sir Reginald, stern and silent. Lady Evelyn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Julian Carver, his cigarette smoke curling lazily. Miss Clara Winthrop, her gaze sharp as a blade. Dr. Grayson, adjusting his spectacles nervously. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, clutching her handkerchief. Major Ernest Blake, his ruddy face flushed with irritation. And Miss Sylvia Trent, her actress's poise strained but intact. Mr. Victor Hargreaves, the solicitor, entered last, his cufflinks glinting as he took his seat. Poirot stood before the group, his small frame commanding the room's attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we have reached a critical moment in our inquiry. The murder of Thomas Reed is a puzzle, but the pieces, they are coming together. The ledger, the pearl, the cigarette, the note with the J, these are not mere clues, but threads in a tapestry of deceit. Tonight I shall weave them together, and the truth, it shall be revealed." A murmur rippled through the room, and Hastings noted the guests' reactions. Lady Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. Julian's smirk faltered, and Hargreaves's fingers froze on his cufflinks. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the whispers. "Let us begin with the ledger. It reveals that Thomas Reed was a blackmailer, profiting from the secrets he uncovered. Madame Langley, Mademoiselle Tron, you have admitted he approached you, but he did not stop there, did he?" Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on each guest. "The ledger contains other names, other sums. Monsieur Hargreaves, your name appears frequently, linked to discrepancies in the estate's accounts. Were you, perhaps, complicit in these irregularities, or merely their recorder?" Hargreaves's face paled, his voice sharp. "I told you, Mr. Poirot, I was addressing those errors for Sir Reginald. Reed's notes are fabrications or misunderstandings. Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone mild, "but let us consider another clue. The pearl, found in the study, from Madame Ashby's necklace. Madame, you claim you were not there, yet the pearl suggests otherwise. Or perhaps someone placed it there to cast suspicion upon you. Who would wish to do such a thing?" Lady Evelyn's voice trembled as she replied, "I don't know. I swear I wasn't in the study. Someone must have taken it. Someone who hates me." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. And then the cigarette, bearing the scent of Monsieur Carver's brand, and the note signed J. "These point to you, monsieur, yet you claim innocence. The evidence, it is almost too perfect, no? As if someone wished us to look at you, and not elsewhere Julian exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing. "You're saying I'm being framed?" "That's rich, Poirot. Who'd bother?" "Someone with much to hide," Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. He turned to the group, his gaze steady. "Let us reconstruct the evening. Dinner began at 7:30 p.m. Madame Ashby left at 8 to check the arrangements, returning shortly after. Monsieur Carver stepped out at 8:30 for a cigarette, returning before 9. Major Blake visited the lavatory, he says, around 8:15. The scream was heard at 9:12, and Thomas Reed was found dead, stabbed with Sir Reginald's letter opener. The study door was ajar, the window open, but no footprints outside. The killer, then, was inside the house. He paused, letting the words sink in. Hastings watched the guests, noting their reactions. Sir Reginald's clenched jaw, Miss Winthrop's raised eyebrow, Doctor. Grayson's thoughtful frown. Poirot continued, his voice rising slightly. "But why kill Thomas Reed?" "Because he knew too much. His ledger revealed secrets, financial ruin, hidden scandals, betrayals. One of you could not allow those secrets to be exposed. So, I ask you now, who was in the study at 9 p.m. when the note instructed Reed to meet?" The room was silent, the tension almost unbearable. Then, to everyone's surprise, "Doctor." Grayson spoke, his voice steady but strained. "I was in the study," he said, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Not at 9, but earlier, around 8:45. I went to fetch a book Sir Reginald had promised me, a medical text. Reed was there, alive, sorting papers. I left him and returned to the dining room before 9. A gasp rippled through the room. Sir Reginald's eyes widened. "You never mentioned this, Grayson." "I didn't think it mattered," Grayson said, his voice faltering. "He was alive when I left, I swear it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what did you see, Doctor?" "What was Reed doing with those papers?" Grayson hesitated, then said, "He was reading something, a letter, I think." He seemed agitated. "I didn't ask questions. I took the book and left." Poirot made a note, his expression unreadable. "A letter, you say? Yet no letter was found, only the note with the J. This is most interesting. And you, Major Blake, your absence at 8:15, was it truly to the lavatory, or did you too visit the study?" Blake's face reddened. "I told you, Poirot, I was nowhere near the study." "This is nonsense." "Is it?" Poirot said, his voice soft but relentless. "The study is near the back stairs, easily reached from the corridor." "And you, Mademoiselle Winthrop, you observed everything at dinner. Did you see the Major return?" Miss Winthrop's lips curved faintly. "I noticed he was gone longer than a lavatory visit might require, Mr. Poirot." "But I cannot say where he went." Blake sputtered, but Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. The truth. It is close. I propose a small experiment. Tonight, after dinner, we shall gather in the study, all of us, at precisely 9:12 p.m. We shall recreate the moment of the scream, and perhaps the murderer will reveal themselves, not by words, but by their actions." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their nerves stretched to breaking. Lady Evelyn's hands trembled. Julian's cigarette burned down to his fingers, and Hargreaves's cufflinks clicked nervously. Hastings, watching from the sidelines, felt a thrill of excitement. Poirot's trap was set, and he knew his friend was playing a dangerous game, pushing the murderer to betray themselves under pressure. As the meeting adjourned, Poirot leaned toward Hastings, his voice a whisper. Mon ami, the trap is laid, but the prey, they are cunning. Watch closely tonight, for the smallest gesture may betray the killer." Hastings nodded, his pulse quickening. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning, and Poirot's psychological gambit was about to test the limits of Blackthorn Hall's secrets. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The study at Blackthorn Hall was cloaked in an oppressive stillness as the clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward 9:12 p.m. on Saturday, September 23rd, 1925. The room, lit by the soft glow of 2 oil lamps, seemed to hold its breath. The heavy oak desk and towering bookshelves casting long shadows across the Persian rug where Thomas Reed had met his end. Captain Hastings stood near the open window, the cool night air brushing against his face, his nerves taut with anticipation. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his evening suit, stood at the centre of the room, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet certainty of a man who had unravelled a puzzle. The guests summoned for Poirot's promised recreation of the murder stood in a tense semicircle. Sir Reginald, his face stern, Lady Evelyn, her hands clutching her repaired necklace, Julian Carver, cigarette in hand, Miss Clara Winthrop, her gaze sharp, Dr. Lionel Grayson, spectacles glinting, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her handkerchief crumpled, Major Ernest Blake, fidgeting with his cuff, and Miss Sylvia Trent, her actress's poise barely masking her unease. Mr. Victor Hargreaves, the solicitor, stood slightly apart, his cufflinks catching the lamplight. Inspector Norris and Constable Willis flanked the door, their expressions sceptical but attentive. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the faint murmurs. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice resonant in the quiet, "tonight we stand where a man was killed, and we shall uncover the truth. The murder of Thomas Reed was no act of impulse, but a calculated deed woven from secrets and lies. The ledger, the pearl, the cigarette, the note with the J, these are the threads, and now Poirot shall weave them into the truth." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the time." The scream was heard at 9:12 p.m., the moment of discovery. Dr. Grayson confirms death occurred between 9 and 9:15. The letter opener, taken from this desk, delivered a single precise blow to the heart. The study door was ajar, the window open, yet no footprints outside. The killer, then, was within the house among us. The guests shifted, their eyes darting. Poirot continued. "The ledger reveals Thomas Reed as a blackmailer, profiting from secrets. Madame Langley, Mademoiselle Trent, you confessed he threatened you, but others too were in his sights. Monsieur Hargreaves, your name appears with sums marked discrepancy. Monsieur Carver, your debts are noted, and Madame Ashby, the pearl from your necklace found here suggests your presence." Lady Evelyn gasped, her voice sharp. "I told you I wasn't here." Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. "Patience, madame. Let us examine the clues." The cigarette, bearing Monsieur Carver's brand, was found in the ashtray, yet he claims he was on the terrace at 8:30. The note, signed J, instructed Reed to meet at 9 o'clock. These point to you, Monsieur Carver, but too neatly, non? It is a frame designed to mislead. Julian's smirk faded, his cigarette trembling. "You're saying someone set me up?" "Précisément," Poirot said. "But who? And why? The pearl. It is another misdirection. Madame Ashby, your necklace was intact at dinner, yet a single pearl was found here. The clasp is secure. It did not fall by chance. Someone placed it to cast suspicion on you. Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. "Who would do such a thing, Poirot?" Poirot turned to the group, his voice rising. Someone who knew Reed's secrets and feared exposure. "Let us consider the ledger. It names many of you, but one entry stands out. A payment to C.W., dated 3 days ago, marked urgent. Mademoiselle Winthrop, your initials, yes?" Miss Winthrop's face remained impassive, but her eyes gleamed. "A coincidence, Mr. Poirot. I told you I had no dealings with Reed." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but let us test this. Dr. Grayson, you admitted to being in the study at 8:45, seeing Reed with a letter. You left him alive, you say, but what if you returned, Doctor, after dinner, to silence a man who knew too much?" Grayson's spectacles slipped, his voice rising. "That's absurd!" "I was at the table when the scream came." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone softening, "but the scream, it is the key. Who screamed, and why?" Perkins found the body moments later, the door ajar. The killer was still here, or had just left. And now, we recreate that moment. Poirot gestured to the desk where the letter opener lay, cleaned but ominous. "Imagine, Reed is here at 9 o'clock, expecting a meeting. The killer enters, takes the letter opener, strikes. The scream follows, perhaps Reed's, perhaps another's. The killer flees, leaving the door ajar. The cigarette, the pearl, the note, all to confuse us." He paused, his eyes scanning the group. But one detail betrays the killer. The ledger. It was hidden in Reed's room, yet its contents were known to someone here. Someone who knew Reed was blackmailing, who knew his habits, who could move freely in this house. "That person is you, Monsieur Hargreaves." The solicitor's face went white, his cufflinks clicking as his hands shook. "Me? That's preposterous. I'm a man of law, not a murderer." Poirot's voice was relentless. "You are a man of secrets, monsieur. The ledger shows payments to you, marked discrepancy. You were skimming from Sir Reginald's estate, and Reed discovered it. He blackmailed you, threatening to expose you. You could not allow it, so you lured him here with the note signed J to implicate Monsieur Carver. You took the pearl from Madame Ashby's dressing table earlier, placing it here to cast suspicion on her. The cigarette you planted, knowing Julian's brand. You stabbed Reed, then screamed to draw attention, slipping back to the dining room in the chaos." Hargreaves staggered, his voice hoarse. "You have no proof. This is all conjecture." "No," Poirot said, producing a small scrap of paper from his pocket. "This is proof. A draft of the note, in your handwriting, found in your room's waste bin. You wrote it, monsieur, and you killed Thomas Reed to protect your theft." The room erupted. Hargreaves lunged toward the door, but Constable Willis seized him, pinning his arms. Sir Reginald roared, "Hargreaves, you devil!" Lady Evelyn sobbed, and Julian's cigarette fell to the floor. Miss Winthrop's lips curved in a faint, approving smile. Inspector Norris stepped forward, his face grim. "Well, Mr. Poirot, you've done it. I'll take it from here." Poirot nodded, his expression serene. "The truth, it always emerges, Inspector. The little grey cells, they do not fail." As Hargreaves was led away, protesting his innocence, Hastings approached Poirot, his voice low. "How did you know, Poirot?" "The note, the pearl, it all seemed to point elsewhere." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The mind, Hastings, it seeks the pattern." Hargreaves was too careful, too precise, yet his cufflinks betrayed his nerves. The draft note, it was his mistake. The rest, it was psychology, the fear of exposure, the need to control. The guests dispersed, Shaken but relieved, and Hastings followed Poirot to the corridor, marvelling at his friend's genius. The trap had sprung, and the truth had been laid bare. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning of Sunday, September 24th, 1925, dawned crisp and clear over Blackthorn Hall, the autumn light bathing the estate in a serene glow that belied the turmoil of the previous night. Captain Hastings stood on the terrace, sipping a cup of strong tea, his mind still reeling from Hercule Poirot's dramatic revelation in the study. The arrest of Mr. Victor Hargreaves had sent shockwaves through the household, and the guests, though relieved to have a resolution, moved with the subdued air of those who had glimpsed the darker corners of human nature. The drawing-room, where they had gathered for breakfast, was quieter now, the clatter of cutlery replaced by murmured conversations and the occasional sigh. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in a dove-grey suit, joined Hastings on the terrace at precisely 9:47 a.m., his valise packed and ready for departure. His moustache was perfectly waxed, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. He carried a small cup of tisane, sipping it with the air of a man savouring the final note of a symphony. Hastings, ever eager to understand his friend's methods, turned to him with a question that had been burning since the previous night. "Poirot," he began, his voice low, "how did you know it was Hargreaves?" The pearl, the cigarette, the note, they all pointed to Julian or Lady Evelyn. Yet you saw through it all. What was it that tipped you off? Poirot smiled, a faint curve of his lips that suggested both amusement and indulgence. "Mon ami, you're always eager for the grand moment, the flash of inspiration. But the truth, it is not a lightning bolt, it is a mosaic, built piece by piece. The little grey cells, they observe, they compare, they deduce. Let me explain." He set his cup on the stone balustrade, his hands gesturing with precise elegance. "From the beginning, I knew the murderer was clever, for the clues were too perfect. The cigarette, it was Julian's brand, yes, but left in plain sight, as if to shout his guilt. The note, signed J, was too convenient, and the handwriting, it did not match Julian's. I compared it to a letter he wrote earlier. The pearl, it was from Lady Evelyn's necklace, but the clasp was secure, and she had no reason to be in the study. These were distractions, Hastings, designed to lead us astray." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "But the ledger. Hargreaves's name was there, alongside the others. How did you single him out?" "The ledger," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming, "was the key, but not in the way it seemed. It listed names: Hargreaves, Julian, Mrs. Langley, Mississippi, Winthrop, but the entries for Hargreaves were detailed, precise, with sums and dates that matched Sir Reginald's discrepancies. Reed, the valet, was a blackmailer, yes, but his targets were not equal. Hargreaves, as the solicitor, had access to the estate's funds. The ledger suggested he was siphoning money, and Reed discovered it. This gave Hargreaves a motive far stronger than the others, a motive to kill, to protect his reputation and his theft. "But the draft note," Hastings said, "that was the clincher, wasn't it? How did you find it?" Poirot's smile widened. "The waste bin, mon ami. Hargreaves was meticulous, but not meticulous enough. In his room, I found a crumpled draft of the note, in his handwriting, hidden among other papers. He wrote it to lure Reed to the study, signing it J to implicate Julian. He planted the cigarette, stolen from Julian's case, and the pearl, taken from Lady Evelyn's dressing table. earlier that day. He screamed to draw attention, then slipped back to the dining room in the chaos, believing his misdirection complete. Hastings shook his head, marveling. It's diabolical, Poirot. He played us all, using the others' secrets to muddy the waters. Oui, Poirot said, but the human heart, it betrays itself. Hargreaves's nervous habit, his cufflinks, always adjusting them, grew more pronounced as my questions pressed closer to the truth. The psychology, Hastings, it is always the key. He was a man of order, yet his order crumbled under the fear of exposure. Hastings glanced toward the house, where the guests were preparing to depart. And the others, Mrs. Langley, Miss Trent, they were being blackmailed, but they didn't kill him. No, Poirot said. Their secrets gave them motive, but not opportunity. Mrs. Langley's financial losses, Miss Trent's scandal, these were embarrassments, not crimes. Julian, too, was a target, but his debts were known to Sir Reginald. He had no need to kill. Lady Evelyn, her distress was genuine. She feared Reed's knowledge of her nervous disposition, perhaps a liaison or a secret, but she was not the killer. Dr. Grayson, Major Blake, Miss Winthrop, they all had secrets, but none matched the precision of Hargreaves's plan. Hastings sighed, his tea forgotten. It's a grim business, Poirot. All these secrets, all this deceit in such a fine house. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. The human soul, it is complex, mon ami. Greed, fear, shame, they drive men and women to terrible acts. But the truth, it is like the sun, it cannot be hidden forever. Poirot, he merely helps it rise. As they stood in silence, Sir Reginald emerged onto the terrace, his face lined with fatigue, but his posture erect. Mr. Poirot, he said gruffly, I owe you my thanks. Hargreaves was a trusted man. I never suspected him. You've saved my household from further ruin. Poirot bowed slightly. Is my duty, monsieur. The order and method, they restore what chaos destroys. Sir Reginald hesitated, then added, I'll see to it that Reed's family, if he has any, are looked after. He was a scoundrel, but he served me well for years. A generous gesture, Poirot said, his tone sincere. Now, if you will excuse us, we must depart. The train to London awaits. As Sir Reginald returned to the house, Hastings gathered their coats, his mind still turning over the case. What now, Poirot? Back to London, and another mystery. Poirot chuckled, adjusting his hat with care. Perhaps, mon ami. But first, a quiet evening, a good meal, and a moment to appreciate the symmetry of a puzzle solved. The little grey cells, they deserve a rest, no? They descended the steps to the waiting motor car, the gravel crunching underfoot. Blackthorn Hall receded behind them, its elegant facade hiding the secrets Poirot had laid bare. Hastings glanced at his friend, marvelling at the mind that had brought order to chaos, and wondered what new challenges awaited them beyond the horizon. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The train to London rattled gently through the Dorset countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing contrast to the turmoil of Blackthorn Hall. It was 2:36 p.m. on Sunday, September 24th, 1925, and Captain Hastings sat opposite Hercule Poirot in a first-class compartment. The rolling hills outside the window bathed in the soft light of early autumn. Poirot, his valise neatly stowed, and his hat resting on the seat beside him, gazed out at the passing landscape, his expression serene but thoughtful. Hastings, still processing the dramatic events of the previous night, felt a need to probe further into his friend's methods, hoping to glean one final insight into the case that had shaken the Ashby household. "Poirot," Hastings began, leaning forward, "I must say you were remarkable last night. The way you pinned Hargreaves down, it was like watching a fencer deliver the final thrust. But there's one thing I still don't understand. How did you know the draft note in Hargreaves's waste bin wasn't another plant, like the cigarette or the pearl?" Poirot turned from the window, his green eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Mon ami, you are persistent, and that is a quality I admire. The draft note, it was no plant, for it was too careless, too personal. The cigarette, the pearl, these were deliberate, placed where they would be found. But the draft, crumpled and discarded in Hargreaves' own room, was a mistake, a moment of human error. No one plants evidence in their own waste bin, Hastings, unless they are foolish, and Hargreaves was not foolish, only desperate." Hastings nodded, his mind tracing back to the study's tense atmosphere. "And the scream? You said it was Hargreaves who screamed, to draw attention. But why risk it? Why not slip away quietly?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his satisfaction, with a question. The scream, it was a stroke of cunning. Hargreaves needed the body to be found quickly, to establish the time of death and confuse the alibis. By screaming, he ensured Perkins would rush upstairs, creating chaos in which he could return to the dining room unnoticed. It was a gamble, yes, but calculated. He knew the house, the servants' habits, the timing of the dinner. He was, as you English say, playing the odds. Hastings leaned back, impressed. "It's diabolical, Poirot. To think he sat among us, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending to be shocked, when all along he'd planned it so meticulously." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice softening. "The human mind, it is capable of great deception, but also of great error. Hargreaves's cufflinks, they were his telltale sign, none? Each time he was questioned, his hands betrayed his nerves. The little grey cells, they notice such things, and they build the case, piece by piece." The train whistle sounded, a mournful note that seemed to echo the sombre mood of Blackthorn Hall. Hastings thought of the guests they had left behind. Sir Reginald grappling with the betrayal of his trusted solicitor. Lady Evelyn, shaken by the suspicion that had briefly fallen on her. Julian Carver, relieved but still wary of his uncle's threats. And the others, each carrying their own secrets, now exposed but not culpable. "What do you think will happen to them, Poirot?" he asked. "The Ashbys, the others, will they recover from this?" Poirot sighed, a rare moment of introspection. "The wounds of betrayal, they heal slowly, Hastings. Sir Reginald, he will rebuild, for he is a man of strength, but his trust, it is shattered. Lady Evelyn, she will carry the fear of her secrets for some time. Julian, he may yet learn from this, or he may not. As for the others, Miss Winthrop, Dr. Grayson, Mrs. Langley, Mademoiselle Trent, they will return to their lives, but they will not forget. The shadow of murder, it lingers." Hastings frowned, his thoughts turning to Thomas Reed, the valet whose curiosity had cost him his life. And Reed? He was a blackmailer, but did he deserve to die? Poirot's expression grew solemn. "No one deserves such a fate, mon ami. But Reed, he played a dangerous game. He saw the weaknesses of others and sought to profit. In doing so, he invited his own doom. It is a lesson, Hastings. The truth, it is a powerful weapon, but it must be wielded with care." The train slowed as it approached a small station. the platform bustling with passengers and porters. Poirot glanced at his watch, then at Hastings, his smile returning. "But let us not dwell on the darkness, my friend. We have done our duty, and the order, it is restored. Now, I look forward to a quiet evening in London, perhaps a little Vivaldi, a glass of sirop de cassis, and the comfort of my own apartment." Hastings chuckled, the weight of the case lifting slightly. "You and your syrup, Poirot. I'll stick to a good whisky myself, but I must say I'm glad to be leaving Blackthorn Hall behind. It's a beautiful place, but far too many secrets for my taste." "Secrets," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "They are the currency of humanity, Hastings. And where there are secrets, there is work for Hercule Poirot." As the train pulled out of the station, Hastings leaned back, his mind at ease for the first time in days. The mystery of Blackthorn Hall was solved, the murderer apprehended, and Poirot's genius had once again triumphed. Yet, as the countryside rolled by, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that other secrets remained, buried in the hearts of those they had left behind. Secrets that perhaps would one day draw Poirot back into the fray. Chapter 13. The Unseen Threads. The London-bound train continued its steady journey through the rolling countryside. The late afternoon sun of September 24th, 1925, casting a warm glow over the fields outside. It was 4:19 p.m., and Captain Hastings, seated comfortably in the first-class compartment, found his thoughts drifting back to Blackthorn Hall. The resolution of Thomas Reed's murder had brought a sense of closure, yet a nagging unease lingered, as if some threads of the mystery remained untied. Hercule Poirot, sitting opposite with his tisane, now replaced by a small notebook, seemed unperturbed, his pencil moving with precise strokes as he jotted down reflections on the case. His calm demeanour, however, only deepened Hastings's curiosity about the subtler aspects of the investigation. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, adjusting his tie, "you've explained Hargreaves's guilt brilliantly, but I can't help feeling we've missed something." The ledger mentioned other names, Miss Winthrop, for instance, with those payments marked CW. You dismissed them as coincidence, but were they? And what about Sir Reginald's discrepancies? Was Hargreaves acting alone, or was there more to it? Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap, his green eyes meeting Hastings's with a mixture of amusement and patience. "Mon ami, you are like the hound who sniffs at every trail, even after the quarry is caught. But your instinct, it is not entirely wrong. The case, it is solved, yet there are threads, unseen threads, that weave through the tapestry of Blackthorn Hall. Let us examine them, for the sake of clarity." He leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The ledger. It was the heart of the mystery, yes? It named many: Hargreaves, Julian, Mrs. Langley, Miss Winthrop. But the entries for CW were vague, lacking the detail of Hargreaves's sums. I concluded they were a distraction, perhaps Reed's attempt to cast a wider net. Miss Winthrop, she is sharp, observant, but her secret, if she has one, was not financial. Perhaps it was personal, a family matter, a grudge against Sir Reginald from his first wife's side. But it was not motive enough for murder. Hastings frowned, unconvinced, and Sir Reginald's discrepancies. Hargreaves was skimming funds, but could someone else have been involved? Poirot's moustache twitched. "A good question, Hastings." Sir Reginald spoke of discrepancies, yet he was vague, protective. I suspect he knew more than he admitted. Perhaps he suspected Hargreaves, but could not believe his trusted solicitor would betray him. The ledger confirms Hargreaves acted alone in his theft, but Sir Reginald's silence, it suggests another secret, one he did not wish exposed, even to save his valet. Hastings's eyes widened. You mean Sir Reginald was hiding something? Could it have been related to Reed's blackmail? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice low. Consider Lady Evelyn's distress, her fear of Reed's knowledge. She spoke of his comments about her nervous disposition. I believe Reed knew of a personal matter, perhaps an indiscretion, a moment of weakness with another. Sir Reginald, a proud man, would not wish such a thing known, even if it meant shielding a blackmailer. But this secret, it was not the motive for murder. Hargreaves killed to protect his theft, not to guard the Ashby marriage. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. So there's another layer to this, secrets within secrets. But why didn't you press Sir Reginald or Lady Evelyn further? Poirot's expression softened, a rare glimpse of compassion in his precise demeanour. Because, mon ami, not all secrets need be exposed. The murder is solved, the guilty man apprehended. To probe further, to unearth private pains for no purpose, it is not the way of Poirot. The little grey cells, they seek justice, not scandal. Sir Reginald and his wife, they will heal, or they will not, but that is their affair. The train slowed as it approached another station, the platform alive with the bustle of passengers. Hastings glanced out the window, his mind turning over Poirot's words. And the others? Miss Winthrop, Dr. Grayson, Major Blake? They all had secrets, didn't they? Oui, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Miss Winthrop, she watches, she knows, but she keeps her own counsel. Dr. Grayson, his visit to the study was innocent, yet he hesitated to admit it. Perhaps he feared his own past, a medical error, a patient lost. Major Blake, his bluster hides a man who fears irrelevance, perhaps a debt or a disgrace from his military days. Even Mademoiselle Trent, her scandal was small, but to her it was everything. Blackthorn Hall, it was a house of mirrors, each reflecting a hidden truth. Hastings shook his head, marvelling at the complexity. It's a wonder you untangled it all, Poirot. Most men would have stopped at Julian or Lady Evelyn, with the cigarette and the pearl. Poirot chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks with a flourish. Most men, Hastings, do not have the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. The clues, they were performance, staged by Hargreaves to mislead. But the truth, it cannot hide from method and order. The draft note, the cufflinks, the ledger's precision, these were the unseen threads that led to him. The train jolted forward, resuming its journey, and Hastings felt a sense of finality settle over him. So that's it then. The case is closed, and we're done. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. For now, mon ami. But life, it is never truly closed. There are always more threads, more puzzles. For Poirot, it is enough to know that justice has been served, and Blackthorn Hall may find peace. As the countryside gave way to the outskirts of London, Hastings leaned back, his thoughts drifting to the elegant estate and its troubled inhabitants. Poirot had unravelled the murder, but the unseen threads, the quiet secrets of those left behind, would linger, a reminder of the fragility of human trust. For now, though, the train carried them toward home, and Hastings was content to leave the shadows of Blackthorn Hall behind. Chapter 14. The Return to Order. The London skyline loomed closer as the train neared its destination. The late afternoon of September 24th, 1925, painting the city in hues of amber and grey. It was 5:43 p.m., and Captain Hastings, seated in the first-class compartment, felt a sense of calm settling over him, tempered by the lingering echoes of the Blackthorn Hall mystery. Hercule Poirot, opposite him, was engrossed in a small volume of French poetry. His fingers turning the pages with the same precision he applied to solving crimes. The gentle sway of the train and the soft clatter of wheels provided a soothing backdrop. But Hastings's mind was still tethered to the events of the past 2 days, and he could not resist one final question. "Poirot," he said, setting aside his newspaper, "there's something that's been nagging at me. You solved the case, caught Hargreaves, and tied up the loose ends, or most of them. But what about the other secrets you mentioned? Miss Winthrop's sharpness, Doctor, Grayson's hesitation, even Sir Reginald's silence about his wife. Do you think there's more to uncover at Blackthorn Hall?" Poirot closed his book with a gentle thud, his green eyes meeting Hastings's with a mixture of patience and amusement. "Mon ami, you are like a dog with a bone, always seeking the next mystery. The case of Thomas Reed is closed, the murderer apprehended, and justice it is served. But you are right. There are always shadows, always secrets that remain. Blackthorn Hall, it is a house built on trust, and trust, once broken, leaves cracks that do not easily mend." He leaned forward, his voice low and thoughtful. "Miss Winthrop, she is a woman of perception, perhaps with a grudge from the past, but her role was to observe, not to act. Dr. Grayson, his hesitation in the study suggests a man who fears his own mistakes, but they were not connected to the murder. Sir Reginald and Lady Evelyn, their marriage is strained by secrets, perhaps an indiscretion, perhaps a matter of pride. But these are private pains, not crimes. To pursue them further, Hastings, would be to disrupt the order we have restored." Hastings nodded, though his curiosity lingered. "I suppose you're right. But it's hard to let go, knowing there's more beneath the surface. You always seem to know when to stop, Poirot. How do you do it?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "The little grey cells, they seek balance, mon ami. A detective must know not only what to uncover, but what to leave undisturbed. The murder of Thomas Reed was a crime against order, and Poirot, he restores that order. The other secrets, love, shame, ambition, they belong to the human heart, and there they must remain." The train slowed as it approached Paddington Station, the platform bustling with travellers and porters. Poirot adjusted his hat, his movements precise as always, and gathered his valise. "Come, Hastings," he said, rising. "London awaits, and with it the comforts of civilization, a good dinner, a warm fire, and perhaps a little music to soothe the soul." Hastings smiled, following his friend as they stepped onto the platform. The noise and chaos of the city enveloped them, a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness of Blackthorn Hall. As they hailed a taxi, Hastings glanced at Poirot, marvelling at the man's ability to navigate the complexities of human nature with such clarity. "You know, Poirot," he said as they settled into the cab, "I sometimes wonder how you stay so calm, with all the deceit and betrayal you uncover." Poirot chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "It is simple, mon ami. The world, it is full of chaos, but the mind of Hercule Poirot, it imposes order. each case, it is a challenge to the little grey cells, and each solution, a victory for method. Blackthorn Hall was but one puzzle, and now we move to the next. The taxi wound through the bustling streets of London, the city's lights flickering to life as evening approached. Hastings leaned back, his thoughts drifting from the dark secrets of Blackthorn Hall to the promise of a quiet evening. Poirot had restored order, as he always did. And though the unseen threads of the case lingered in Hastings's mind, he was content to let them rest. The world, as Poirot had said, was full of chaos. But with the little Belgian by his side, Hastings felt ready to face whatever mysteries lay ahead. Chapter 15. The Final Departure. The London evening of September 24th, 1925, wrapped the city in a gentle twilight, the gaslights casting a warm glow over the bustling streets. It was 7:28 p.m., and Captain Hastings stood outside Hercule Poirot's impeccably maintained flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The familiar order of his friend's life, a stark contrast to the chaos of Blackthorn Hall. The taxi that had brought them from Paddington Station had just departed, its engine fading into the city's hum, and Hastings felt a sense of finality settling over him. The mystery of Thomas Reed's murder was solved, yet the journey had left him reflective, his thoughts lingering on the fragile web of trust and secrets they had unravelled. Poirot, his valise in hand and his hat tilted at a precise angle, paused at the door to his flat, his green eyes catching the light as he turned to Hastings. "Mon ami," he said, his voice warm but tinged with his usual precision. "You look as if you carry the weight of Blackthorn Hall still upon your shoulders. Come, we shall have a tisane, or perhaps for you a whisky, and we shall put this affair to rest." Hastings smiled, following Poirot into the flat. The interior was a study in order. Polished furniture, neatly arranged books, and a small vase of fresh roses on the table, no doubt courtesy of Poirot's devoted housekeeper, Miss Lemmel. As Poirot busied himself with the preparation of his tisane, Hastings sank into an armchair, his mind turning over the case one final time. "Poirot," he said, accepting a glass of whisky from the sideboard, "you've tied up the murder neatly, but I can't help wondering about the others, Sir Reginald, Lady Evelyn, Julian. Will they ever be the same after this?" Poirot settled into his chair, his tisane steaming gently. "The heart, Hastings, it is resilient, yet it bears scars. Sir Reginald, he will rebuild his trust, though it will take time. Lady Evelyn, her secrets, whatever they may be, will haunt her, but she is strong. Julian, he is young, reckless, but perhaps this will teach him caution. The others, Miss Winthrop, Doctor, Grayson, Mrs. Langley, Mademoiselle Trent, they will carry their own lessons from this affair. Life, it continues, and so must they." Hastings sipped his whisky, the warmth spreading through him. "And Hargreaves? What do you think will happen to him?" Poirot's expression grew solemn. "Monsieur Hargreaves, he will face justice. The evidence, the draft note, the ledger, his own nervous habits, it is overwhelming. He sought to protect his theft, but in doing so, he destroyed himself. It is a tragedy, mon ami, but one of his own making." Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to the study at Blackthorn Hall, where the garnet-encrusted letter-opener had ended a life. "It's a grim business, Poirot. All those secrets, all that deceit, hidden behind the elegance of that house. It makes you wonder how many other secrets lurk in places like that." Poirot's moustache twitched. a faint smile playing on his lips. "Every house, every heart has its secrets, Hastings. But not all secrets lead to murder. The task of Hercule Poirot is to find those that do, and to restore the balance. The little grey cells, they see what others miss. The gesture, the glance, the contradiction that betrays the truth." Hastings chuckled, raising his glass. "To your little grey cells, then. They've saved the day." Once again Poirot inclined his head, his smile broadening. "And to you, mon ami, for your loyalty and your questions which keep Poirot sharp. Now, let us speak no more of Blackthorn Hall. The case, it is closed, and the evening, it is ours. Perhaps a little Vivaldi to soothe the soul." He rose, moving to the gramophone, and soon the delicate strains of violin music filled the room, a counterpoint to the city's distant clamour. Hastings leaned back, the tension of the past days easing at last. The mystery of Blackthorn Hall had been a dark and tangled affair, but Poirot's genius had brought light to its shadows. As the music played, Hastings felt a deep gratitude for his friend's unwavering clarity, and for the quiet moments like this, when the world seemed right again. Outside, London pulsed with life, its secrets hidden in the twilight. But within the ordered sanctuary of Poirot's flat, Hastings knew that whatever mysteries lay ahead, the little Belgian detective would meet them with the same unyielding resolve. For now, though, the case was closed, and the final departure from Blackthorn Hall was complete.